I never wanted to inherit my grandfather's farmhouse. The sprawling 40-acre property in Mendocino County had been in our family for generations, but I'd always felt something was deeply wrong with the place. Even as a child visiting during summers, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the wheat fields that couldn't be explained by the wind, and hear whispers in the night that made my skin crawl. When Grandpa Mason passed away last spring, I had no choice but to return. The property had fallen into disrepair over the years, and as his only living relative, it fell to me to either restore it or sell it. I chose the latter, but the real estate agent insisted we needed to do basic repairs before listing. That's how I found myself spending 3 weeks alone in that massive Victorian farmhouse, surrounded by endless fields of swaying wheat and the eerie silence of rural California nights. The first few days were uneventful, just the tedious work of clearing out decades of accumulated junk from the barn and replacing rotted boards on the wraparound porch. It was on the fourth night that things began to change. I was sorting through boxes in the attic when I found an old leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. It belonged to my great-grandmother, Elizabeth Mason, dated 1923. Most entries were mundane accounts of farm life, but one passage caught my eye. The workers won't go near the north field anymore. 3 have gone missing this month alone. James says it's just desertion, but I've seen the way the wheat moves when there's no wind. I've heard the singing at night. Something is hungry out there. I dismissed it as the imaginative writings of a lonely farmer's wife. But that night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard it. A soft, melodic humming carried on the breeze. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the north field. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and walked out onto the porch. The full moon cast an ethereal glow over the wheat fields, creating shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. The humming grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like a woman's voice, singing an old lullaby I half remembered from childhood. I stepped off the porch, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The wheat parted before me as I walked, creating an unnatural path toward the source of the singing. The air grew colder with each step, and my flashlight began to flicker. When I reached the center of the north field, the singing stopped abruptly. The wheat around me stood perfectly still. Despite the wind, I could hear rushing through the rest of the field. My flashlight died completely, leaving me in the pale moonlight. That's when I saw them. Dozens of pale faces emerging from the wheat stalks, their features twisted in eternal agony. I recognized some of them from old photographs in the house, farm workers who had deserted over the decades. They reached for me with ghostly hands, their mouths opening in silent screams. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back toward the house. Behind me, I could hear the wheat rustling violently, as if something massive was moving through it in pursuit. I didn't stop until I was inside, doors locked and lights blazing. The next morning, I found deep furrows in the earth leading from the north field to my back door, as if something had dragged itself across the ground. But worse than that was what I found in the attic. My great-grandmother's journal had new entries, written in fresh ink, but in her distinctive handwriting. Another one has joined us in the wheat. The hunger never ends. I called a real estate agent that day and listed the property as is. Let someone else deal with whatever lives in that field. But sometimes, on quiet nights in my city apartment, I swear I can still hear that singing, calling me back to the wheat. Living next door to the Rodriguez family farm in the Central Valley seemed like a dream come true when my wife and I first moved in. Maria Rodriguez brought us fresh vegetables and homemade tamales, while her husband Carlos helped me fix our ancient irrigation system. Their teenage children would wave as they drove past on their way to school. They were the picture of rural California farming success. But something changed last August, during the height of tomato harvesting season. I started noticing lights in their fields at odd hours of the night, and strange chanting that echoed across the valley. The Rodriguez kids stopped going to school, and Maria no longer brought over her weekly gifts of produce. When I asked Carlos about it over the fence one morning, his usually friendly demeanor had shifted. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he gripped his coffee mug. "The harvest," he said, his voice hoarse. "It must be perfect this year. She demands perfection." Before I could ask who she was, he hurried back inside. That evening, I saw the entire family walking into their tomato fields, just as the sun was setting, carrying what looked like ancient farming implements and wearing strange, dark robes. My wife thought I was paranoid, but I knew something was wrong. I set up a wildlife camera facing their fields, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever nighttime activities were occurring. The first few nights showed nothing unusual, just normal agricultural work. Then came the night of the harvest moon. The camera captured the Rodriguez family performing what appeared to be a ritual in the center of their tomato field. They had erected a crude altar made of twisted vines and vegetables, and at its center stood a figure I still have trouble describing. A woman, but not a woman. Her skin appeared to be made of twisted roots and vines, her hair a mass of writhing tomato plants. She towered over the family, her mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal rows of seed-like teeth. The footage showed the family prostrating themselves before this entity, offering up baskets of their finest tomatoes. The creature consumed them whole, and with each offering, the surrounding plants seemed to grow and twist unnaturally, creating a dense canopy that obscured the rest of the ritual from view. The next morning, the Rodriguez farm had transformed. Their tomato plants had grown to monstrous proportions, heavy with fruit that gleamed an unnatural shade of red. The family walked the rows with glazed expressions, harvesting tomatoes that pulsed like beating hearts. I tried calling the county agricultural board, but they dismissed my concerns. No one would believe what I'd seen on that camera footage that mysteriously corrupted itself the next day, leaving only static. The Rodriguez family's tomatoes hit the local farmers markets that weekend. People raved about their incredible taste, saying they'd never had anything like them. I watched in horror as my neighbors consumed the fruits, noting how their eyes began to take on the same glazed look as the Rodriguez family. The transformation was subtle at first. Gardens across the neighborhood began growing with unnatural vigor, vines creeping up houses and wrapping around trees. People started spending more time tending to their plants than going to work or school. The chanting at night grew louder, coming from more and more houses. Last week, my wife brought home some of the Rodriguez tomatoes from the market. I tried to stop her, but she'd already taken a bite, the unnaturally red juice running down her chin. She smiled at me with seeds in her teeth, and I swear I saw something moving beneath her skin, like tiny vines taking root. I'm leaving tonight, heading somewhere far from any farms or gardens, but I fear it's too late. The harvest has already begun, and she's always hungry for more devotees to tend her fields. The ad seemed too good to be true. 10 acres of prime farmland in Sonoma County for a fraction of the market price. The catch? The previous owners had disappeared without a trace 3 years ago, leaving behind a fully operational vineyard and a house filled with their belongings, as if they'd simply walked away one day and never returned. The bank was eager to unload the property, and as a first-time farmer with dreams of running my own vineyard, I wasn't about to let the opportunity pass. My real estate agent warned me about the property's troubled history, not just the disappearance of the previous owners, but a pattern of mysterious accidents and vanishings stretching back to the 1970s. I should have listened, but the allure of those perfectly maintained grapevines and the charming farmhouse was too strong. I moved in during the winter pruning season, when the vines were bare and skeletal against the gray sky. The first thing that struck me as odd was the scarecrow. It stood in the center of the vineyard, much larger than any scarecrow I'd ever seen, its frame made of twisted grapevines, and its head, a cluster of dried grapes that seemed to shift and change expression when viewed from different angles. The previous owners had dressed it in old farming clothes, complete with work boots and gloves. I tried to remove it. Something about it made me deeply uncomfortable, but the vine framework had rooted itself so deeply into the ground that it wouldn't budge. After breaking 2 shovels attempting to dig it up, I gave up and decided to leave it be. That's when the dreams began. Every night, I'd see myself walking through the vineyard under a blood-red moon. The scarecrow would turn its head to follow my movement, its grape cluster face morphing into a twisted smile. In the dreams, it would speak to me in a voice like rustling leaves. The vines are hungry. They always need more. Why do you think they let you buy this place so cheap? I dismissed the dreams as stress-induced nightmares, but I couldn't ignore the changes in the vineyard. Despite it being winter, new shoots began emerging from the supposedly dormant vines. They grew at an impossible rate, wrapping around the trellises and reaching toward the house with an almost sentient purpose. One morning, I found scratches on my bedroom window, scratches made from the outside on the second floor. The new vine growth had somehow climbed the walls overnight, its tendrils pressing against the glass as if trying to get in. But the real horror began when I started renovating the wine cellar. Behind a false wall, I found dozens of photographs dating back to the 1970s. Each showed a different owner or worker on the property, smiling proudly among the vines. But in every photo, in the background, stood the scarecrow, exactly as it looked now, unchanged by time. The final photo in the stack showed the previous owners. They were standing in front of the scarecrow, but something was wrong with their eyes. They were completely black, like clusters of overripe grapes. On the back of the photo was written, "The harvest approaches. We give ourselves to the vines." That night, I heard singing coming from the vineyard. When I looked out my window, I saw them. Ghostly figures moving between the rows of vines, their bodies translucent in the moonlight. All the previous owners and workers still tending to their crops in death as they had in life. The scarecrow stood among them, its head turned toward my window, that terrible grape cluster face now sporting a wide, seeded grin. The vines began growing again that night, faster than ever. They wrapped around the house, blocking the doors and windows. I could hear them creeping through the walls, breaking through the plaster, with wooden fingers that reached for me in the dark. I managed to escape through a second-floor window, though the vines tried to hold me back, leaving deep scratches across my arms and legs. As I ran to my car, I heard the scarecrow's voice on the wind. "You can leave, but you'll be back." They always come back for the harvest. I'm writing this from a motel 50 miles away, but I know it doesn't matter. The dreams haven't stopped. Every night, I see the vineyard, the ghostly workers, and the scarecrow with its knowing smile. I can feel the vines calling me back, their song growing louder with each passing day. The bank just listed the property again, another bargain price for prime Sonoma County farmland. I wonder if the next owner will see the pattern before it's too late. I wonder if they'll understand why the scarecrow smiles, or why the vines grow so well in soil fed by decades of disappeared farmers. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my eyes are darker than they used to be, taking on the deep purple-black color of overripe grapes. The harvest is coming, and the vines are calling me home.